Hello and welcome to CodeSlicing. In this exciting two-part series, we're going to be building the settings icon. Yes, we're finally going to do it, and it's my favorite one of these things so far. It's filled to the brim with detailed information that will take your shape design to the next level. Now you might be wondering, if it only takes 15 minutes, why is it a two-part series? Well, as much as I enjoy doing these things as fast as possible, really showcasing the true power of PureSwiftUI, a 100% free and totally awesome Swift package that you should start using immediately, making your SwiftUI coding immeasurably more productive and fun, it's more important that you understand what's going on. So with that in mind, I'm still going to be racing against the clock, but if I think something deserves a little more explanation, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause the clock, give you the rundown, and then continue. Having said that, I am going to be assuming an intermediate understanding of layout guides in this one, so if you haven't seen my series on them, I do recommend watching it before continuing. However, if you just want to get on with it, let's get started. Right, this one's going to be brutal, so let's quickly run through what we've got on the screen and then get going. So, I've got a square frame around our settings icon. I've got a greedy frame around that so I can color it with a nice background color, and I'm showing layout guides on a preview device of an iPhone 12 Pro Max. And with that out of the way, let's start the clock. And the first thing I'm going to do is to find some colors. As usual, start color is equal to 228, 229, and 231. Then the end color of our gradient is 139, 143, and 150. Then we can define our gradient, which is a linear gradient with those colors. We'll send that to the bottom. And now we can define our first shape, which is going to be our shroud. And we can then refer to it immediately and fill it with our gradient and put all of this in a Z stack. Let's resume. And this shape's going to be very easy. It's going to be a rounded rectangle inside that rect with a corner radius of 0.22 of the width. And then we add an ellipse with the center as the origin. And we're going to say the size is going to be the size of the rectangle scaled to 0.87. And we're going to anchor it to the center, like that. Okay, now we need to define some styling. So extension on shape. This is going to need to be annotated with View Builder. And we're going to pass in a debug parameter here, which is why we need that View Builder annotation there. So if we're debugging, we're going to stroke it with white with a style that looks nice. The line cap of round, a line join of round, get rid of the rest. And if we're not debugging, I want to fill it with our gradient. But this time I want to fill it with EOFill equal to true. And then instead of fill, we'll just say icon style. And let's pass in a debug parameter here. Like that. Then we can resume. And now we're going to start defining the primary cog, which means we need some constants. Number of teeth is equal to 54. The segments we're going to have per tooth is going to be equal to 20. And the number of segments overall, therefore, is equal to the number of teeth times segments per tooth. And then we can define our layout guide config. Teeth layout config is equal to a layout guide config of type polar. And this is going to have two rings, one at 0.87 885 rather specifically, and one at 1. And the number of segments is going to be the number of segments. Right, here's our cog. Then we can use it up here. And we'll give that the same icon star. Let's resume. Let primary cog scale, which is a CG float, equal 0.8. And then the cog is going to take that scale. So we say that in our cog shape, it takes in a scale. So let's pause that clock and I'll explain. The reason we're passing in a scale parameter is to do with how we are going to be scaling our shape. Because there are two ways to scale a shape. You can either give it a specific frame, which will obviously size the shape to that frame, or you can scale the path within the frame. Okay, and they behave in different ways when it comes to the fill. Normally, if you were going to scale a shape based on the icon size, you would do it like this. You would put a geometry reader here. You would take all of this stuff and paste it in there. And then you would say, my frame is equal to the width scaled 0.8. And then in the shape itself, let's just put a circle at the center, and we'll give it a radius of half the width. But there's a problem here. It's not immediately obvious because our gradient is a very subtle one. However, if I give it a more obvious gradient, shadowing the file level gradient like this, let gradient equals linear gradient with red and yellow. We'll send that to the bottom as well. It's still not very obvious, but if I do this, if I make that circle only 0.2, you can see the problem in that the gradient starts at the top and finishes at the bottom of that circle. All right, and this is the crucial difference in behavior. If we scale the path, it will pick up the same gradient for that entire frame. All right, so that's why we're going to be scaling our path and not scaling our frame. Let's start that clock and get going on those teeth. So we're going to set debug to true. We're going to put a layout guide on this, the teeth layout config, scaled to the primary cog scale with a color of green. And then we're going to really zoom in so we can see what's going on by giving it a frame of 4000 and a Y offset of 1400 so we can see the top. Then we go to our shape and we say that the polar layout for our teeth is equal to the teeth layout config scaled to the scale laid out in the rectangle. Then we move to the top, well, almost the top, 0, 0, and then we draw a line to 1, 4, draw another line to 1, 6. We go back in to the inner ring to 10, and then we draw another line to 20. That's one tooth. We're going to loop through all the teeth. Tooth in 0, num teeth. We add a offset is equal to the tooth times segments per tooth. And then we take that segment offset and we paste it in here and add it. And now we need to rotate them a bit so they're in the center. We do that like this. First of all, we make sure that's a variable and we assign it to itself, rotated, minus the angle to coordinate 1, 5. Stop the clock. This needs some explanation. Let's take out this rotation. And now we're going to just go to 1. So our tooth consists of going from 0, 0, which is the first index out, and we're going to go up to 1,4. Then we're going along to 1,6. Then we're going back down to the first ring, which is the 10th segment. Then we're going all the way to the 20th segment on the inner ring, because we're defining the number of segments per tooth as 20. So it goes 0 to 20. And then what I can do is repeat that, but just offset the starting segment by the offset that we are currently on. So we set that back to the number of teeth. And then we need to rotate that. And the reason I'm taking 1,5 is because 5 is halfway between 0 and 10, which is the size of our actual tooth there. So we need the midpoint to be rotated anti-clockwise, so it ends up right in the center. Using layout guides, there are two other ways you can do this. And if you've watched the episode on repeating patterns and symmetry, you'll know what they are. What we've got in front of us is probably the most performant solution, because it just involves one layout guide and you're just picking points out of that one guide. The other two approaches involve rotating a layout guide in some way for each tooth. Let's look at the first way of doing it. Let's duplicate this and then comment all that out for now. We're going to get rid of those segments per offset. We don't need that. And at the end of each loop, we're going to rotate the layout guide by a rotation delta, which works out to be this. Rotation delta is equal to the angle to 0 segments per tooth, like that. And then we can take that rotation, put it in here and say the PT is PT rotated rotation delta. That gives us our teeth. Now it's quite important that we calculate this before we rotate the layout guide, or it will give us the wrong angle because it will have been rotated at that point. I really want to rename this to segments per tooth because that's driving me crazy. Okay, right, let's get that back and resume. Now we don't need that tooth variable at this point, but I've left it in because we're going to need it for the next approach. Because what we've got in front of us right now is a lot of decorating going on. Every iteration creates a new decorator on top of the previous one, which is rotated a little bit more. Now, while layout guides are incredibly performant and you should not be afraid of using them at all, you do at least have to be aware of this kind of thing. So there's an alternative, which is as follows. Instead of this, I'm going to move this up and I'm going to shadow the PT variable here with a local one. And I'm going to call it rotation delta times the tooth that we're on. This is a better approach in this case because we are only going to be decorating the layout guide once for each iteration. So we've got good performance. It's easy to understand. I think easier to understand than the original version. So I'm going to use this version going forward. So let's start that clock once I've deleted that. Okay. So we're going to go down here. We're going to give that a frame of 400 again, get rid of the offset, and then we can go back up here, set debug to false, and then we can comment out our layout guide. Okay, stop the clock. That's it for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to be building the spokes, and that's when things get really tricky. We're going to take things to a new level of complexity, so join me for that. It's going to be brilliant. If you're liking it so far, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe because you don't want to miss how this one finishes. It's going to be epic. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.